At dawn, the town was still alive. Roosters crowed behind wooden fences. Motorbikes coughed into motion. Women swept dust from doorways that had existed for generations. Children argued over school bags. Nothing in the air suggested that this would be the final normal morning this town would ever know. And yet, beneath their feet, the earth had already begun to move. Not shake. Not tremble. But walk. No one noticed it at first. The first sign was not dramatic. It was a hairline crack appearing across a kitchen floor. Then another slicing through a road. A door that would no longer close properly. A well that began to spit out water the color of wet clay. People blamed bad construction. Old foundations. Poor drainage. This town had survived floods, droughts, even earthquakes. The land had always held. Until it didn't. By mid-morning, a low sound began to travel through the soil. Not loud enough to hear clearly, more like a pressure you felt in your chest. Farmers later described it as the sensation of standing near a giant animal breathing underground. At exactly 9:42 a.m., the ground behind a rice field collapsed. What emerged was not fire, not lava, but mud. Thick, gray, bubbling mud, pushed upward with such force that it swallowed the field in seconds. Steam hissed into the sky. The smell of sulfur spread like a warning no one understood yet. This was the birth of a mud volcano. Mud volcanoes are rare but known. They exist in places where underground pressure forces water, clay, and gas to the surface. Scientists consider them slow, mostly harmless geological features. This one was different. Within hours, the mud vent expanded. The ground around it softened, flowing outward like wet cement. Houses nearest to the field began to sink, not collapse, but descend, as if being gently lowered into the earth. People ran. Others stood frozen, watching walls tilt and trees lean at impossible angles. Livestock vanished into the gray slurry without a sound. Emergency calls flooded local offices. Officials arrived, confused and unprepared. They expected an eruption site, a fixed location. But the vent did something no one had ever recorded before. It moved. Over the next days, the mud did not simply spread. New vents opened hundreds of meters away. Old ones closed. Roads buckled in lines that curved like veins. It was as if the volcano itself was migrating beneath the surface, choosing new places to emerge. Scientists would later admit something terrifying. There is no existing model that explains a migrating mud volcano. The town's map became meaningless. Safe zones changed daily. A house that survived the night would be gone by morning. Schools shut down. Markets disappeared. Still, authorities hesitated. They told residents it was temporary. They said the pressure would stabilize. They said relocation was unnecessary. They were wrong. Within weeks, entire neighborhoods were submerged under meters of mud. Not destroyed, entombed. Rooftops became islands. Street signs poked out like grave markers. Families tried to salvage belongings. Many never returned. One elderly man refused to leave his home. He had been born there, married there, buried his parents in the nearby cemetery. That cemetery vanished 3 days later. Graves slid into the mud. Headstones tilted and disappeared. The dead were swallowed without ceremony. Satellite images shocked the world when they finally surfaced. A town that had existed on maps for over a century was fading into a gray blur. Boundaries dissolved. Rivers changed course. Roads ended abruptly in nothingness. The ground itself was rewriting geography. International geologists arrived, stunned. Boreholes revealed something unprecedented. Pressurized mud chambers were shifting laterally beneath the town, driven by forces no one fully understood. The earth wasn't erupting. It was migrating. And it was taking the town with it. By the end of the first month, evacuation was mandatory. But it was already too late. Businesses were gone. Homes lost. Compensation stalled in legal confusion. The town's name remained on paper. But on the ground, it no longer existed. What had once been streets, laughter, memories, was now a moving sea of mud. And this was only the beginning. The first mistake scientists made was assuming the volcano had a center. In classical geology, every eruption, whether fire or mud, has an origin point. Pressure builds, a vent opens, material escapes, and the system gradually stabilizes. That assumption guided the initial response: establish a perimeter, monitor the main vent, and wait. But by the fourth day, instruments told a different story. Seismic sensors placed around the original eruption site began recording micro-movements far outside the danger zone. These were not earthquakes. They were slow, horizontal shifts, like something heavy sliding beneath the surface. At first, technicians suspected faulty equipment. The data contradicted everything they knew. Then a new vent opened, nearly a kilometer away. There was no warning explosion. No dramatic collapse. The ground simply softened, bulged, and exhaled mud. It flowed into drainage canals, filled courtyards, and climbed staircases as if guided by intent. Residents began using a new phrase to describe what they were seeing. They said the mud was searching. Houses that stood on higher ground were not safe. The mud found fractures, followed buried pipes, exploited old foundations. It rose through bathroom floors and kitchen drains. People woke to the sound of liquid gurgling inside their walls. Government officials, now under media pressure, requested national geological assistance. Experts arrived with ground-penetrating radar, gas analyzers, and drilling rigs. What they found forced an uncomfortable admission. This was not one mud volcano. It was a system. Beneath the town lay multiple overpressurized sediment chambers, ancient layers of clay and water trapped under impermeable rock. Normally, these chambers remained static for thousands of years. Something had destabilized them. Some scientists pointed to deep drilling conducted miles away years earlier. Others blamed tectonic stress along an unseen fault line. A minority suggested a rare resonance effect, pressure waves bouncing underground until the weakest points failed. None could explain why the chambers were moving laterally. Mud, by nature, should rise vertically. Gravity dictates it. Physics demands it. Yet borehole samples showed shear marks, evidence that material was sliding sideways under immense force. One geologist compared it to toothpaste being squeezed from multiple directions inside a sealed tube. The town sat directly above the squeeze. As days passed, the migration accelerated. New vents formed in clusters, then vanished. The ground hardened in some areas, lulling residents into false hope, only to liquefy elsewhere hours later. Authorities tried zoning maps. Red, yellow, green areas. The maps were obsolete within 24 hours. A school marked safe collapsed into slurry during morning assembly. Teachers pulled children through windows as floors turned viscous beneath their feet. Miraculously, no one died, but the psychological damage was immediate and lasting. Nighttime was worse. Without visual cues, people felt the movement through vibration, beds rocking subtly, walls whispering. Dogs refused to enter houses. Birds abandoned the area entirely. One resident described it as living on top of something that hates you. The media descended. Headlines called it a freak event, a once-in-a-century anomaly. Reassurances followed every press conference. Behind closed doors, the language was different. Internal reports used words like unprecedented, unstable, nonlinear. One memo circulated with a blunt conclusion: containment is not possible. Engineers attempted barriers, concrete channels, earth dams, diversion trenches. The mud overwhelmed them all. It seeped underneath, pushed through cracks, and resurfaced beyond the barriers as if mocking human effort. Then the volcano did something no one anticipated. It split. 3 major vents opened simultaneously in a triangular pattern around the town center. Pressure dropped at the original site but surged elsewhere. The migration was no longer random. It had direction. Satellite data revealed a slow but consistent drift toward the town's oldest district, the place with the densest buildings, narrowest streets, and weakest foundations. History had made it vulnerable. Residents pleaded for relocation funds. Officials argued over jurisdiction. Insurance companies declared the event an act of nature, with undefined liability. Time passed. Mud did not stop. Electricity failed. Water lines ruptured. Sewage mixed into the slurry, creating a toxic soup. Skin rashes spread. Respiratory problems followed. Masks became common, not for viruses, but for the stench of sulfur and decay. At night, fires burned where gas escaped and ignited. Blue flames danced atop the mud, surreal and silent. The town began to empty, not through organized evacuation, but through quiet disappearance. Families left at dawn, taking only what they could carry. They did not say goodbye. They did not know if there was anyone left to hear it. By the end of the second month, aerial footage showed a haunting image, a town half present, half erased. Streets ended in gray nothingness. Roofs protruded like shipwrecks from a sea that should not exist. Geologists presented their findings at an emergency conference. The room was tense. Cameras rolled. When asked how long the event would last, the lead scientist paused. "We don't know," he said. "The system is still evolving." When asked if the mud volcano could stop migrating, he hesitated again. "There is no historical precedent," he admitted. "This appears to be the first recorded case of a mobile mud volcanic system." The phrase echoed across headlines worldwide. Mobile, mud, volcano. 3 words that should not exist together. And yet, beneath the town, the earth continued to move, slowly, relentlessly, rewriting not just maps, but the limits of human understanding. The impossible had already happened. The question now was how much more the ground would take. By the 3rd month, the town was no longer a place. It was a process. What had begun as an eruption had evolved into something disturbingly dynamic. The mud no longer behaved like a substance released by pressure. It behaved like a system responding to its environment. And that system was moving. Scientists tracking the vents noticed a pattern that unsettled even the most experienced geologists. The openings were not random. They followed zones of weakness, old riverbeds, abandoned wells, utility corridors, pathways carved by human history. The mud was exploiting everything people had built. Using high-resolution satellite imaging, researchers layered historical maps over current damage zones. The overlap was exact. Where the town had expanded recklessly, where regulations had been ignored, where soil compaction had been insufficient, the mud appeared first. It was as if the earth remembered. Residents still living on the outskirts described the sound of migration as a deep, internal dragging. At night, the ground pulsed. Furniture shifted. Doors creaked open without wind. One woman reported that cracks in her walls would seal themselves by morning, only to reappear elsewhere, wider than before. The land was rearranging itself. Attempts to predict the direction of movement failed repeatedly. Mathematical models assumed gravity-driven flow. The real movement showed lateral drift, pressure redirection, and episodic acceleration. In one documented instance, a vent closed completely within hours, its surface hardening like dried cement. Officials declared the area safe. 12 hours later, a new eruption opened directly beneath a nearby hospital wing. Patients were evacuated in panic as floors turned to liquid beneath hospital beds. Wheelchairs sank. Medical equipment vanished into the mud. No fatalities occurred, but only because nurses broke protocol and ran. The migration forced authorities into constant retreat. Evacuation lines shifted weekly. Safe shelters became unsafe. Temporary housing had to be abandoned. Maps no longer used street names. They used dates. This area lost on March 18th. Vent emergence detected April 2nd. Zone compromised. The town's identity dissolved alongside its geography. Psychologists brought in to assess residents reported symptoms normally associated with war zones: hypervigilance, dissociation, sleep paralysis. People spoke of the ground as if it were alive. "It follows us," one man said. "It chooses," said another. Language changed under stress. Livestock refused to drink from local water sources. Crops died not from burial, but from contamination. The mud carried heavy metals, hydrocarbons, and ancient bacteria released from deep underground. Environmental experts warned of long-term ecological collapse. The mud was not just covering the land, it was poisoning it. Meanwhile, political pressure mounted. Why had this town been allowed to grow over unstable sediments? Why were drilling permits approved decades earlier? Why had early warnings been ignored? No answers came. Behind the scenes, emergency committees debated a radical idea: abandoning the town entirely. Not relocating temporarily, erasing it from habitation. The proposal was deemed too extreme. The volcano answered the debate itself. In a single week, the migration surged forward. Vents opened in a chain reaction, moving nearly half a kilometer. Roads folded like paper. Bridges twisted and sank. A main highway, the last connection to the region, buckled and vanished beneath flowing mud. The town was now physically isolated. Helicopters became the only access. Footage from above showed something no one expected: the mud was not spreading evenly. It was forming channels, streams that flowed, branched, and rejoined. It behaved less like mud and more like a slow river system. Geologists realized they were watching a landscape being reborn, one hostile to human settlement. The final blow to any remaining hope came when the volcano crossed a boundary scientists believed inviolable. It moved uphill. Against gravity, against expectation, the mud advanced toward elevated ground. Pressure differentials beneath the surface overpowered slope resistance. Foundations cracked. Hillsides softened. The last untouched neighborhood was consumed in silence. Residents who had refused evacuation stood on rooftops, watching mud lap at their feet. Some cried. Others filmed. A few simply stared, unable to process the loss. One man shouted into the void, "Where do we go?" No one answered. By the end of the third month, official maps labeled the area as unrecoverable. Infrastructure costs exceeded reconstruction value. Insurance systems collapsed under undefined risk categories. The town was officially declared uninhabitable. Not destroyed. Uninhabitable. The distinction mattered. Destroyed things can be rebuilt. Uninhabitable places are warnings. The migrating mud volcano had not exploded. It had not killed in a single dramatic moment. It had done something far more unsettling. It had erased a town slowly, methodically, forcing humans to retreat step by step, map by map, memory by memory. And still, beneath the mud, pressure remained. The system had not stabilized. It was only adapting. Erasure does not happen all at once. It begins with absence. First, the sounds disappear. No engines. No voices. No footsteps on pavement. The constant background noise of daily life fades, replaced by an unnatural quiet broken only by the slow, viscous movement of mud. Then the smells change. Food smoke is replaced by sulfur. Clean water by rot. Familiar scents that once anchored memory are overwritten by something ancient and hostile. By the fourth month, the town was no longer being evacuated. It was being forgotten. Entire districts stood empty, half submerged, windows staring blankly into nothing. Furniture floated where living rooms used to be. Family photos drifted in the slurry, faces dissolving as ink bled away. The mud did not rush. It advanced at walking speed, slow enough to be watched, fast enough to be unstoppable. This pace made it worse. Residents who returned briefly to retrieve belongings described a unique cruelty. The land gave them just enough time to hope. A house might stand untouched for days, then sink overnight. A street might appear stable, then liquefy without warning. One family returned to their home to retrieve wedding jewelry. The front door still opened. The living room was intact. By the time they reached the bedroom, the floor behind them had begun to soften. They escaped barefoot, leaving everything behind. There were no heroes in this disaster. No final stand. Only retreat. Municipal records offices were abandoned next. Birth certificates, marriage records, property deeds, documents that proved lives had been lived, were left behind to rot. Digital backups existed, but the physical artifacts of identity vanished. When the town hall collapsed into the mud, no one filmed it. There was no audience left. Cemeteries suffered the most disturbing fate. As the mud rose, coffins floated. Bones surfaced. Families who had already lost their homes now lost the dead they had buried with care. Religious leaders attempted ceremonies. They were interrupted by ground failure. Prayer tents sank mid-ritual. Faith struggled to find footing on liquid earth. Children adapted faster than adults. In shelters, They spoke of the town in past tense within weeks. Psychologists noted the shift with alarm. Adults could not let go. They dreamed of streets that no longer existed. They spoke in directions, near the old bridge, behind the market, as if landmarks still stood. The mud erased not just structures, but orientation. Aerial footage taken monthly documented the transformation with brutal clarity. What began as a recognizable settlement degraded into abstract shapes. Blocks dissolved into patches. Roads into lines, then stains, then nothing. Maps were updated less frequently. Eventually, they stopped. Government agencies quietly removed the town from development plans. Postal codes were retired. Emergency response zones redrawn. It was not officially declared dead. It simply ceased to be acknowledged. Scientists continued monitoring, though funding waned. The mud output stabilized in volume but not in position. Vents still shifted, still opened and closed, still breathed gas and slurry into the air. One report used an unsettling phrase: the system has reached a new equilibrium. An equilibrium with no humans in it. Former residents scattered across the region. Some lived with relatives. Others in temporary housing that became permanent by neglect. Compensation claims dragged on, buried under legal ambiguity. Was this a natural disaster? An industrial accident? A geological inevitability? Each classification shifted responsibility. Most claims were denied. Years of community history dissolved into case numbers. The psychological toll deepened. Rates of depression, anxiety, and substance abuse spiked among the displaced. Counselors reported a recurring theme. People felt they had been erased alongside their town. "I don't know where I'm from anymore," one woman said. Children asked when they could go home. Parents had no answer. The final school bell had rung without ceremony. By month 6, nature began reclaiming the mudscape. Weeds sprouted where streets once ran. Insects bred in stagnant pools. Birds returned, not to the town, but to the new wetlands forming in its place. Life adapted quickly. Human systems did not. A proposal emerged to convert the area into a research exclusion zone. No rebuilding. No return. The land would be studied, not settled. The idea passed quietly. On the last official visit, a survey team placed a marker at the town's former center. It sank halfway into the ground within minutes. They retrieved it and left. There was nothing left to mark. The town had not been destroyed by fire or flood or war. It had been unmade, piece by piece, memory by memory, by a phenomenon science could describe but not control. And beneath the surface, pressure still pulsed. The migration had slowed. But it had not ended.